Kailangan ba naka-open, open cam?
Kailangan open cam. Yan, start na. So, experiment number 3 vectors. Yuval objectives niya.
Objectives. Number 1. Differentiate between scalar quantities and vector quantities. 2. Resolve vectors into its components. Number 3. Use two different methods to add vectors graphically and analytically. Number 4. Explain the relation between the equilibrant force vector and the resultant force vector.
So, diretso na tayo. For number 1, classify the following quantities to either scalar or quantity or vector quantity. Kuya Wilmar, pabasa nga po yung sagot natin. Naka-off mic po ata kayo. Yeah.
For the answer, sorry po. Ayan, so for the answer po ng number 1 is weight vector quantity, speed scalar quantity, mass scalar quantity, acceleration vector quantity, then density scalar quantity, distance scalar quantity, force vector quantity, and volume scalar quantity.
Yan. So for number 2, find the magnitude and direction of the resultant force of F1 and F2 by filling the table. The magnitudes and directions of F1 and F2 are given. So ang given ay ng magnitude of force F1 is 44 and given sa F1, F2 is 17. So sa pinakataas may given na important formula si Miss para makuha yung mga kailangan. So yung direction then given sa F1 is 28, sa F2 is 106. So para makuha yung x component, ang gagawin ay yung ax is equal to a cos theta. So mangyayari 44 cos 28 is equal to 38.85. So, ganun po yung ginawa namin, Miss. Ginamit po namin yung formula nyo. For x component for F1, 38.85. For x component of F2 is negative 4.69. For y component of F1, 20.66. For y component of F2 is 16.34. Now, for our resultant po, sa magnitude of force po, 50.35. For direction, 47.28. X component is 34.16. And for the Y component is 37. So, the magnitude of the resultant force is 50.35. So, R is, ginamit po namin yung, yung formula nyo, Miss. Square root of F1 squared plus F2 squared. Isa-substitute lang po, square root of 34.16 squared plus 37 squared is equal to 50.35. And for the direction of the resultant force is 47.28, where our direction is equal to arctangent quantity 37 over 34.16. So for number 3, Lennard, kaya mong basahin yung sagot natin? Lennard.
Tol.
Sabi mo lang yung laman.
Force is F1, magnitude of force 0.77, direction 100, x component 0.120, negative 0.120, y component 0.184, F2, magnitude of force 61, direction 30, x component 0.528, y component 0.305. At ang F3 po, 0.043, magnitude force, direction 156, x component negative 0.392, y component 0.175. Resultant po ay X component 0.014, Y component 1.169.
So for the next number 4, pupunta po sa simulation, din sasagutan po. Yubs, pabasa nga nung sagot natin.
Teka, hindi ko mabasa. Press sub muna. Hindi ko mabasa. Naglo-loading.
So ako na. So for A, the magnitude of vector is 6.8, direction is 32, x component is 5.77, y component is 3.6. Yung B, 5.3, ang magnitude of vector, direction is 90, x component is 0, y component is 5.3. And for last S, the magnitude of vector is 10.61, direction 57.04, x component is 5.77, y component is 8.9. So the question is, what is the magnitude of the vector S? And our answer po, the direction of the vector S is 57.04 degrees northeast with the magnitude of 10.61. So to make the system at equilibrium and equilibrium force Fe should be applied, what is the magnitude of direction of Fe? So miss, may nilagay na po kami doon na solution po namin kung ano po ang naging sagot. For number 4, okay ka na Yubs? Yung another 4, part 2.
Okay, number 4, calculate the magnitude and direction of the resultant force of the forces given in the figure below. F1, ang magnitude of force is 50. The direction of F1 is 150. The exponent of F1 is negative 43.30, and the y component of F1 is 25. F2, the magnitude of force of F2 is 75. The direction of F2 is 45. The x component of F2 is 53.03, and the y component of F2 is 53.03. Same. Next is F3. Magnitude of force of F3 is 50. The direction of F3 is 270, and the x component of F3 is 0, and the y component of F3 is negative 50. The resultant sa x component is 96.33, and the y component is 128.03. Yes, formula pa rin.
At nasaan ka na ba? Wait lang, nag-solve ako.
Dun sa Rx equals
Yan.
Ax plus Bx.
So, yun po yung formula na given, Rx or yung resultant is equal to Ax component, Bx and Cx. Ganun din po sa resultant of Y component para po makuha. Isa-sum lang po all of the components po na nakuha. So ang overall po yung resultant is the magnitude is 29.67 and the direction of the resultant force is 70.86. So for number 5, Kuya Wilmar, pabasa nga po.
So for the number 5 questions, what is the relations between the resultant force and the equilibrium force? So, sorry po. Teka lang, nag-load. Okay. So for our answer po, the concurrent forces are the forces that pass throughout at the same point. Resultant is the single force that can replace the effect of several forces. Equilibrant is a force that is exactly opposite to a resultant. Equilibrium and resultant have equal magnitudes but opposite directions.
So, number 6, ano, pabasa nga, Lennard.
Wait, pre. Number 6, pre.
Number 6.
Wait, tol. Two forces, one with magnitude 3n and the other 7n, are applied to the ring of a force table. The directions of both forces are unknown. Which of the following best describe the limitation of the magnitude of resultant force? A. R less than or equal 10n, 3n less than or equal R less than or equal 7n. C. 4n less than or equal R less than or equal 10n. R. D. R greater than or equal Rn. E. R less than or equal 7n.
Yan. So, ang answer po namin nandun na po sa word. So, for number 7, add the following forces both analytically and graphically, then calculate the percentage error of the resultant force. Use the analytical result as the actual value. So, for forces, we have 3 forces, F1, F2, F3, and given po yung magnitude and direction, which is F1 is magnitude is 0.3 and its direction is 30, while F2, the magnitude is 0.5 and the direction is 100. Then F3, magnitude is 0.2 and the direction is 145. So miss, may ano po kami, may nilagay na po kami picture kung ano pong magiging kakalabasan po ng mga coordinates po na yon. So for the analytical method po, we have yung 3 forces po uli. So ngayon po, kinuha po namin yung x and y component. For F1, the x component is 0.26 and for its y component is 0.15. For F2, x component is negative 0.09 and y component is 0.49. And F3, x component is negative 0.16 and y component is 0.11. So for the resultant of the magnitude of force is 0.76. The resultant of direction is 89.31. The resultant of x component is 0.01 and for y component is 0.76. So, resultant is equal to square root of sum of x po. So, kaya yun po ang kinuha po yung resultant of x plus resultant of y po. I-square root po. Then, ang sagot po namin is 0.76. For the percentage error po, ang formula po is experimental value minus theoretical value over theoretical value times 100. So, ang substitute lang po, 0.65 minus 0.76 over 0.76 times 100 is equal to 14.47. And for our last, the conclusion, pabasa na lang po. Kuya Wilmar.
Okay po, for the last conclusions po namin. So, answering the objectives, the scalar and vector quantities have many differences. First is scalar quantities. It only has one-dimensional informations, which is the magnitude. Unlike the vectors quantity, it has two-dimensional informations, which are the magnitude and direction, meaning the vector quantity is more specific than scalar quantity. Sorry. Now, There are two methods for finding vectors introduced in this experiment, graphically and analytically. After utilizing the two methods in certain questions, our group have concluded that by solving for the vectors analytically, managed to solve and get exact and accurate results compared to the resultant from the solving graphically. This may be due to the manual measurements needed when plotting the vectors in the graph. We also had to learn the definitions and differences between the equilibrium and resultant force, where resultant force vector refers to the single force that is the sum of all vectors. It is a direct quantity which possesses both magnitude and direction, while equilibrium force vectors have the concurrent as those of resultant but in the opposite direction. To make it simple, this is concurrent forces may have equal magnitude, but they occur in opposite directions. Since the equilibrium force vector is the opposite of the resultants, it balances the other forces, therefore resulting into a state of equilibrium.
And that's all
Okay po.
po, Miss. Thank you po. Yan. End
Thank you
ko na
po.
yung
Thank you
recording.
po, Miss. Arigato gozaimasu.